All right, welcome to the third of 4 scheduled online forums to provide information and answer questions about the town's clean water plan. My name is Patrick Cassidy. I'm working as a consultant with the town to make sure that voters have the facts about the plan and understand the votes that are before them at the upcoming town meeting and town election. In that role, I'll be facilitating these discussions. Full schedule of the forums was posted to the town's website, its Facebook page, and you should have received a copy if you're on with us today. I'll be sending out a link to the final scheduled forum, which is scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning on April 22nd. I encourage you all to attend that as well, and feel free to tell your family, friends, and neighbors about it so they can be on too. We'll get started shortly. Just a quick explainer of how we're going to handle questions. Everyone but the panelists will be on mute to start. Please don't unmute yourselves during the presentation or until you're called on to ask a question. And just in case you haven't been on Zoom for the past year, like many people have, the mute button should be down in the left-hand corner of your screen. The panelists will generally be spotlighted unless they're sharing slides. While they're talking or once they've finished, you can indicate if you have a question through a number of different methods. Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a reaction button, and if you click on that, there's a raise hand feature. You can use that to let me know that you have a question. You can use the chat feature, and I'll just say hi through the chat feature right now so everybody can see where that is, but it's also at the bottom of your screen. And you can raise your hand physically, and I will endeavor to make sure I look around at the screens and make sure to get to all the questions with people who are doing it the old-fashioned way with their hands up. If all else fails, you should have had a phone number, a cell phone number in the email I sent you. You can text a question mark and your name to that number. And then last resort, at the very end, I'll ask if there are any last questions, and you can just unmute yourself at that point and let us know if you haven't been called on for some reason. Just give me a second at that final juncture to basically recognize you to make sure people aren't stepping on each other as far as speaking. This is for questions, not statements or promotions. If you have a question that can't be answered immediately, I'll work to get an answer for you after the forum has ended. Once everyone has had a chance to ask an initial question, you can go through the same process to ask a second or follow-up question. This particular forum is a repeat of one we did on Tuesday night. It's entitled, How Do We Pay for It? We'll first hear from Tom Fudala, who's the chairman of the Sewer Commission and former town planner. He has a long history of working on this issue. He'll share some of that history and provide some context for where we are now. Town manager Rodney Collins will give us an overview of how the town will finance the project, including some breaking news on that front, I believe. And finally, Selectman Andrew Gottlieb will discuss more details about the sources of funding for the project. As I mentioned, we're hoping to rebroadcast this so those who can't be here today can benefit from these presentations and your insightful questions, I'm sure. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. And Tom, at this point, you can unmute and we'll see how your sound's doing. And you can start your talk.
I just checked my watch, going for 10. How's the sound? Okay. I'm a tiny thing. I'm a tiny little picture in the corner of a picture of you. Is that supposed to be the way it is?
You look fine on this end, Tom. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, in any case, as Patrick said, I'm Tom Fudala, was a town planner hired in 1984. Even back then and beforehand, in the 70s, people started noticing problems with the Mashpee River, which obviously is the heart of Mashpee, in terms of reduced water quality and shellfish closures. When I was first hired, I was given 2 basic jobs. One was to help get the water district created, and the other one was to, on the bumper sticker, let's see, that reads backwards. It says, save the Mashpee River. And at that point, the big approach was purchasing land, what is now the Mashpee River Woodlands, which was scheduled to be a 283 homes and an 18-hole golf course. Later on in the 80s, the planning board hired a firm called KV Associates to do some studies to find out what was going on with the river. And it was actually their studies, Dr. Bill Kerfoot's, that pointed out that we had very high nitrogen levels in the Mashpee River, particularly in the mid portion between 28 and the bay. And so we decided to try to start dealing with that. We created a sewer commission, which was created in 1988. We actually had projects that we tried to put together with some private developers. It was actually a town meeting vote in 1988 authorizing the commission to build a treatment plant at the what's now the transfer station site. Because those were all privately funded, they fell through because of the recession we had in the early 90s. In any case, the problem wasn't dead. In the 90s, the big push across the state were these newfangled, innovative, alternative denitrifying septic systems that people thought would solve the problem. And continued public interest led to the second round of bumper stickers for what was called Nashby Watershed Year, 1997, 1998. There were some great people like Beverly Kane and Ed Baker and all that got together, and we brought in all kinds of scientists to tell us, what should we do? And the bottom line that came out of that was George Hoyfelder from the county health department and also Falmouth Board of Health that said, I don't know, couldn't tell you that what you need to do to get the bay back to where it's supposed to be, because we don't have any numbers to tell you how much nitrogen it can handle. So that started us dealing with Dr. Brian House from the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, their SMAST program, so-called. He started doing water quality testing in the river in 1997, and based on some of those results, town meeting in 1999 voted the funds, $405,000 to do a wastewater plant for the town, which we ended up calling the Mashpee Watershed Nitrogen Management Plan, because it was focused on dealing with the nitrogen problems we knew we had in the bays. After various fits and starts, and particularly the creation by the state, and Andy was very much involved in this, of the Massachusetts Estuaries Program, working with Dr. House, we were able to get those numbers that George said we needed before we could try to solve the problem. So about 2007 or so, we got what are called TMDLs, total maximum daily loads of nitrogen that the base could handle and be healthy like they used to be. You're gonna have a guy in the next program on the 22nd named Bill McKay, who lives on the river. When his kids were young, they were able to swim in the river on a nice sandy bottom. If you went out there now, as many of us has done, you'll find a couple feet of black muck, not at all attractive for swimming. But it's just that we had a paradise and it was getting destroyed. So all that leads to 2015. Our consulting firm and the Sewer Commission completed the Watershed Nitrogen Management Plan. And if you could pull up the first slide, Patrick. All right, I'm seeing your whole screen. Any way we can just get to the map?
You should be able to see the map right there. Wow.
Yeah, I can see the map and all of the other controls and everything around it. I was wondering if to just do the screen itself. In any case, if this is the best we can do, the plan, and this is sort of the map of the plan, is intended to be developed in 5 phases. And while we were developing the plan, our shellfish constable, Rick York, came up with the, turns out, brilliant idea of trying to use shellfish to help clean up the water itself. It was already in the bays, and started with the oyster propagation program in the Mashpee River, and also using quahogs in the Wacoit, Hamlin Pond, Great Little River. And based on his estimates, he figured that he could actually take care of all of the nitrogen removal we needed for those, like I said, Hamlin, Jehu Pond, Great Little River with quahogs. So that's where we're going with that part of the town. In terms of the Mashpee River, which is where our focus began, you figured you get rid of half of the nitrogen reduction. In other words, not half the nitrogen in the river, but half of the amount that we needed to reduce to get down to a decent water quality there and in Papaneset Bay. So that's how the shellfish got incorporated into the plan. Was not because we started with it, but because Rick York came up with a great idea that worked out, and turns out we're the only, at least as far as I know, we're the only pond in the country that's been approved by EPA to include shellfish propagation in our cleanup plan. The first phase of the plan, which is what we're talking about doing now, is shown in pink on this map. If you could put up the second map, Patrick, we can talk a little bit more specifically about where that is.
I will do that, Tom. If everybody can just make sure they're muted. There's some feedback coming through. I'm trying to find that.
Yeah. Somebody's moving around out there. So what we end up looking at now for the construction in the first phase is the area that's in, looks like yellow on the screen here. That's basically the service area. The treatment plant, that little green box, is on a portion of the property that has the transfer station, the police firing range, and the big solar panels on it. That is about just under half the cost of the project is to build that treatment plant, and hopefully putting most of the tankage in the ground for the later phases, all at this point. The issue with the phases, by the way, I should explain, is that they're supposed to be 5-year phases. Obviously, we're a little bit behind schedule, but once the first phase of the sewer construction was done and we've had the 5 years or whatever of shellfish results, we look at what's happened, how has the water been cleaned up, how much has it been cleaned up, how's the shellfish working, and at the end of the 5 years, we do a review in a process that's called adaptive management to basically look at those 5 phases and see whether we want to change things around a bit based on the results of the first phase, and then move into the second phase and ultimately third phase, and hopefully not the 4th or 5th phase, because if the shellfish do what Rick figured they could do, we won't need to get into those later phases. And so the shellfish potentially is, last time I estimated, could save us about $100 million worth of capital cost in sewerage and sewering if they do their job. So this is the current plan, the treatment plant and the area basically surrounding it, Sea Oaks to Summerwood along Route 28 and down Orchard Road and Mashpee Neck Road to a little portion of Simon's Narrows Road. This is what we're planning on building. There might be some minor adjustments to when we get into the final design. We're at 70% design right now. But this is what you'd be looking at voting for at town meeting. As I said, this is a process that's basically started in terms of people's recognition of the problem more than 40 years ago, and it's about time we fixed it. We've got the chance now. The plans are all done. The financing, you'll hear, has been all laid out, so it won't cost you an extra penny from what you're going to pay in your taxes, and it's time to go. I'll answer questions later, but let's move on to the guys that talk money.
Appreciate it, Tom. Appreciate the context, and we're going to learn more about that financing piece now from Town Manager Rodney Collins.
Thank you, Patrick. Hello to everyone, and I'd like to start by thanking the town's communication consultant, Patrick Cassidy, for coordinating and organizing this forum. I would also like to thank Selectman Andy Gottlieb, the board's liaison to sewer, and also Sewer Commission Chair Tom Fudala, who you just heard from. Relative to the Mashpee wastewater project plan, or phase one as it's commonly referred to, I'd like to start by going over some underlying circumstances. The town has projected a cost of 54 million over the next 30 years to address phase one. The 54 million is calculated into the estimates used for these projections. The Mashpee Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan, otherwise referred to as CWRMP, recommends a comprehensive hybrid plan for all areas of Mashpee that relies on both aquaculture and wastewater collection and treatment. This is phase one of the collection and treatment part of the plan. The shellfish propagation program alone, which Commissioner Fudala referred to, is known to be insufficient to address water quality needs. And as such, it is probable that state or federal governments may intervene at a greater public and private cost if the town doesn't promptly act on its own initiative. Conservative estimates are used in terms of real estate and its market and future revenue to provide a margin of safety for this analysis. I'd like to also get into some financial assumptions. The town's finance plan is built on the following assumptions. The town has qualified for $54 million loan from the State Revolving Fund, or SRF, that will be at an interest rate of 0.0%. This assumes that the town will adopt a flow neutral bylaw, which is referred to as Article 8, in May. The town will benefit from a 3.3% reduction of the principal owed due to a grant from the SRF. The 2% WIF authorized by the voters in 2020 remains in place throughout the loan repayment period. The short-term rental tax remains in place through the loan repayment period. In 2020, Mashpee voters set the short-term rental tax rate at 6% and dedicated 75% of receipts to wastewater. The rooms tax actual for fiscal year 21 is $549,680 with 2 quarters received. Our conservative revenue assumption is $750,000 per year going forward, but we know that is low. For instance, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce estimate is $1,140,941. The Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund was estimated to provide a grant of 10% of the project cost. Based on a vote just last night, the grant from the fund exceeded our expectations of 10% and is now in the amount of 25% of the project cost, or 2.5 times the amount that we counted on, and that further lowers the cost of the project to the town. It is based on the assumptions above that most certainly now conservatively estimated. I have full confidence in the soundness of this financial plan to service the debt of the capital construction costs related to this project. What are the open items? Once approved, the project will move to construction. Several operational matters will then be taken up, but it is assumed that the rates and charges to users will cover the cost of operation and maintenance of the system over the long term. Revenue assumptions will need to be determined by a professional consultant, but again, rates and charges are expected to cover operations once the system is active and online or fully functional. The town will engage in a professional consultant to provide a good faith estimate for operations and maintenance. Rates will then be set through a public process by the Sewer Commission, and I expect operations to be a contracted or contractual service and not town employees.
All right, thank you, Mr. Collins. Appreciate it. And everybody just remember that if you have questions, you can, at this point, you could chat them through the chat feature, or you could raise your virtual hand if you want. I won't suggest you keep your physical hand up while Mr. Gottlieb is speaking, but you can raise your hand physically, and I can look for you if your video is on after Mr. Gottlieb is done speaking, and then we'll take questions at that point. And without further ado, Mr. Gottlieb, the floor is yours. And just unmute yourself, Andrew.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Appreciate everybody taking time out of your day to sit in on this conversation. And Pat, if you could bring up that pie chart again. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to walk you through finances again, expanding a little bit on what Mr. Collins said, and then talk a little bit about individual costs outside of the capital infrastructure costs, and then we'll take questions. So as Rodney said, the finance plan the town has put together funds in its entirety the cost of servicing the debt on this project without asking voters for additional taxpayer support. And the way we've done that is to rely on a number of different revenue streams. So if you look at the $54 million cost, 1.8 million of that 54 million is being provided through a state loan or a state grant that will forgive a portion of the principal of the $54 million loan. So we'll be borrowing $54 million from them, but paying back $1.8 million less as a result of that grant. Similarly, as Rodney mentioned, Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust, which was created at the end of 2018 and is funded by the 2.75% surtax on short-term rental stays, was created exactly for this purpose, and last night awarded $71 million in funding to 8 towns across the Cape to support projects that look a lot like ours. Mashpee received $12.8 million of that, which was the second largest individual grant issued to any community on Cape Cod. And as Rodney mentioned, that exceeded our expectations when we built this financing plan. So it provides an enormous amount of cushion, saves local rate base substantial additional funds. The other two sources are the 22.5 million of the 54 comes from the local option rooms tax. So when people book a room in Mashpee, they're paying a 6% local option tax that comes back to the town. Town meeting set aside 75% of those receipts and dedicated them for wastewater fund implementation. So we are taking that money out over the life of the loan and applying 22.5 million of it to this. It is a non-property tax base, not paid by the local ratepayers or taxpayers of the town of Mashpee. And then the remainder, 27.8 million, comes from the Water Infrastructure Investment Fund, which was voted and approved by the town in 2020 and has a 2% surtax on property values, much like the Community Preservation Program has over the years. And that money will begin being collected regardless of what happens with this vote beginning on July 1. So we're basically taking the money that is programmed to be collected and directing it for the purpose for which it was intended, which is to service this debt. So if you look at all these revenue streams, we have more than enough money coming in from them to cover the $54 million cost, and the authorization to proceed at town meeting will not result in an increase of property tax assessments. The caveat to that is that, as Mr. Collins mentioned, the state revolving loan fund of $54 million comes at a base rate of 2% interest. Towns on Cape Cod have the option to obtain a 0% interest loan from the Commonwealth if they put in place a bylaw or regulation that ensures that only a reasonable amount of additional flow from new development will go into the sewer system that you're building, because the intent of the state in buying down that interest rate is to clean up an existing problem, not to make it worse by adding more nitrogen to the system. So Article 8 puts those limits in place. The cost dollar value to the town of Mashpee, the difference between the 2% interest on a $54 million loan and the 0 interest on the $54 million loan paid back over 30 years, is $17 million. And so question 8 is an extremely important, not only component of this financial management plan, but extremely important feature for the Mashpee voters to consider. They have the choice of whether they want to raise or lower the cost of this project by $17 million. A yes vote on question 8 would lower the cost of this project by $17 million. A no vote would add $17 million in debt repayment back to the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. So this is the, as Tom mentioned, this is the area that is being covered. The project will go to bid, assuming an approval in May. The project is anticipated to go to bid in November, with construction commencing in the spring of 22. A likely 2-year build out to build the facilities, get the sewers in place. And so connections, actual connections to the treatment plant should not be expected to commence until sometime in 2024 or 2025. Do we have the next slide on individual costs, Pat? Great. So there will be 439 properties at the moment that are expected to be connected to this initial phase. The town has chosen not to assess betterments. So that is common in many towns around us, for a percentage of the $54 million to be recovered through betterment assessments, which are specifically charged to those homes or properties who have frontage along the streets that are going to be serviced by sewer, whether they connect to said sewer or not. The town has chosen not to make those betterment assessments. So the entire $54 million cost will be distributed proportionally across the tax base, and property owners who have frontage along the sewer line will not be expected to pay an incremental additional amount. The reasons for that are that multitude, we don't anticipate all homes eventually ever needing to be on sewer, or hope that to be the case. And so we didn't want to create a different system across the town that people would be treated potentially differently. Similarly, everybody contributes to the water quality problem that we have in town through the use of their septic systems, and therefore thought it appropriate that everybody contribute in a like and similar manner to the solution. And lastly, we all benefit from the clean water that's going to be created as a result of this project. And so those arguments resulted in no additional betterment assessment. There is, however, a cost to connect to the system. And the cost is variable, and it's driven most by the distance between your house and the sewer pipe. So large lots, long driveways, big setbacks, have longer pipe runs, it costs more. Shorter pipe runs, smaller lots, frontage that's closer to the street ends up costing less. A very similar project, most recently done in the town of Falmouth, we found that the average range was sewer connection costs of $4,000 to $6,000. It can range substantially less than that and substantially more than that, depending on how big your property is and what's in between your house and the sewer pipe. But we felt a degree of confidence that the Falmouth experience should be typical for the areas that we anticipate initially sewering in Mashpee. That is not to say there will not be an exception that falls out of that range, but that's what we expect the norm to be. For folks that are having difficulty with whatever the connection cost fee would be and having that money available up front, both the county and the town offer loans that allow you to spread the cost of the connection out over a 20-year period and pay it back as associated with your tax bill. Those are currently 5% loans. Both the county and the town are working with the state to meet the requirements to reduce those loan percentages as low as 0. And we anticipate those loan rates to have changed well before the sewer system is ready for connections, and we'll be able to provide more information to people on that in relatively short order. The county is actively working on it. I'm part of a committee that the county commissioners have assembled to come up with the method by which we're going to drop that to potentially as low as 0. For anyone who connects to a sewer, you are then eligible for a reimbursement of 40% of that cost, up to $6,000 on a dollar for dollar basis on a tax credit on your state income tax returns. So as long as you're under that $6,000 amount, you'll get up to 40% of that. You'll get 40% of that back. Obviously, you'll get 40% of 6,000 if your bill exceeded that. That tax credit differs from a deduction. It's worth more. It's a dollar for dollar reduction in taxes owed, and you have multiple years in which to consume that tax credit if you can't use it all up in the first year. So that will help. And then lastly, sewer rates. For users of the system, you will pay a sewer rate, much like you pay a water bill. And we don't yet know, as Mr. Collins mentioned, we have not yet engaged in the service contract, which will determine what the cost of operation is going to be. And so it's an unknown at this moment. But in Falmouth, again, as a matter of reference, typical wastewater bill is about $500 a year. And we don't expect to be radically different than that. A lot of it depends on how much water you use in your home. And so there will be variability on that. But we think that's a typical amount that will become known over the course of the next year or two. And as Rodney mentioned, the sewer rate setting process is a public process. It will go through the sewer commission. It will be done in the full light of day. People will know what went into that and what the cost of that is going to be. So that is our financing plan and how we best anticipate it would be impacting individuals with the information we know right now. And I'll remind everybody that there are 4 critical votes that require your attention. Town meeting, Article 6 is the authorization to construct this project and to borrow the money to do so from the state under the terms we just described. Article 7 is a relatively minor question that authorizes us to use a relatively small portion of a conservation property for a pump station. Article 8 is incredibly important as it's the key to obtaining the zero interest loan and therefore save $17 million in interest payments by limiting to a reasonable amount the future flow allowed into the system. And then on Saturday, May 8th, at the town election, you'll be asked to approve a debt exclusion, which, unlike debt exclusions you've been asked to vote for in the past, will actually not raise your taxes, which may leave you scratching your head as to why do I need to approve it then? And the reason is that the town is allowed to do a certain amount of borrowing under limits under state law. If this project is kept within that cap, it will consume all of our available debt capacity and will hamstring us in our ability to borrow money for other projects in the future, and therefore would result in a jeopardizing our credit rating, which will increase our cost of borrowing for future projects. This debt exclusion moves the $54 million outside of the cap we live under and preserves our financial rating in the eyes of the bond agencies. But because we have prepaid the cost of debt service, as we described to you earlier in this presentation, you will not see an increase in your taxes as a result of that debt exclusion vote. But that debt exclusion vote is necessary in order for this whole project to proceed as we've described it. So 2 critical days, May 3rd town meeting. We have moved town meeting to an outside venue, covered tent, to provide the maximum amount of public health protection and to limit potential spread of COVID and people's exposure to COVID, recognizing that a lot of people may want to participate but don't want to risk their well-being to do so, which is a perfectly reasonable position to take. So the board on Monday night, acting on Mr. Collins' recommendation, moved town meeting outside. And so we would really encourage you to come to town meeting and participate in this historic vote for clean water for the town. And then on the May 8th, you have the opportunity to vote. You are able to file for an absentee or early voting application if May 8th is not a convenient time for you to vote, or if you're concerned about being in an enclosed environment to vote, you can file an application, which you can get at Town Hall on the table out front of Town Hall, or online and mail it or drop it at the drop box to the right of the front door, and get your ballot in the mail. You can either return that ballot by mail. If you do so, mail it early to assure that it is received in time, given some of the delays we've seen with first class mail these days. Or if you're concerned about that, there's a drop box, a secure drop box on the right side of the main door of Town Hall, into which you can drop your ballot and it will be properly accounted for and cared for. So with that, I will stop and hand it back to Patrick.
Thank you, Andy. So I did see a hand raised by Tom. And Tom, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, go right ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear.
Yeah, hi, it's actually Matthew Hayne. I don't know why my thing comes up as Tom on the iPhone there. First off, I want to just thank Gottlieb and Fudala for all the effort and time they put into this sewering. And, you know, I've been in the town a long time and I've seen the Mashpee River. I've swum in the river and, you know, it has to happen. I mean, you have to do the town sewer. And so one way or the other, this will happen. I think everybody realizes that. But my question really is for planning purposes, you know, the cost, and it's the connection cost that I'm trying to understand how is that going to play out? And the other, I got a couple of questions, so I'm just going to, you know, lay off one and then you guys maybe answer that, then I'll go to the next one. Now, after the sewer mains are placed in the street and the system is ready to receive sewer, what is the time frame to connect?
So the connection costs are a private obligation of the homeowner to their contractor. And so any homeowner, property owner will be expected to or need to make an arrangement with a private contractor and have the system designed and contracted, installed, and the transaction is a private one. So it's whatever arrangements you individually work out with your contractor. The connection to the system, once the sewers are in the street, will be a mandatory connection. Ultimately, the Board of Health will declare existing systems failed, and there'll be a timeline that will be adopted through consultation and arrangement between the Board of Health and Sewer Commission on what the timeline to connect to the system would be for all property owners. And again, that'll be something that is a public discussion and rules that will be adopted through public deliberation.
Okay, so that's it's up in the air right now what the time frame is. Will the town subsidize any of the costs or operation costs for this sewering?
In the end, the cost of operation is required by the state to be covered by rates and charges. In the early years with startup and without the system fully operational, as customers come into it over time, there may be a need for the town to provide some operating subsidy during startup, but the requirement of the state financing is that rates and charges ultimately cover the full cost of operation and maintenance of the facility.
Okay, and now is it when you guys put the mains in the streets, are they going to pave the full width of the streets?
The state allocates a certain amount of the job for repair of the streets. There's about $7.9 million of the 54 million is in road repair and maintenance. There's potentially where we have intention to upgrade or repave streets, there may be an effort to coordinate the town's road maintenance program so that it's synced up with the installation of the sewers, so that we're lowering the cost of both sides of the equation of repairing the street. But in most instances, it will not result in a curb to curb replacement of the street, but simply a repair in the trenched area.
Okay, I really appreciate it. Thank you for answering those questions there. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question comes from Doug Adams. Doug, you can unmute and ask your question.
Oh, thanks, Patrick. This is probably for Andrew. Very quick question, Andrew. The 3 articles on the town meeting and the question on the town ballot for the election, are they all written in such a way that a yes vote is supportive of the plan?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
And just the question 6 requires a 2/3 majority. Article 7 and 8 and question 1 on the ballot requires simple majority. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Question 7 also requires a 2/3. Question 8 requires simple majority, and question 1 on the ballot is a simple majority.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And anybody, again, who has another question, feel free to raise your virtual hand, chat it to me. But just to fill in a little space here with a question that came up the other night and didn't get asked in that context. So I want to make sure it gets asked here. And maybe, Tom, you can speak to the first part of this question, and then either Andy or the town manager can speak to other parts of it. But the question was, what would happen if town election declines to approve this project? And I think, Tom, you and I had been talking about costs.
Well, I mean, obviously the first thing is we will not be able to build the sewer system that should have been built decades ago. And every year that you put it off, whether you like it or not, the cost is going up rapidly because of the cost of materials and all, particularly in the current environment. The other issue is that the town has been notified that by the Conservation Law Foundation that they want to sue us for using septic systems which push nitrogen into the ground, into the bays, rather than having moved ahead with the sewers. So the longer we wait, the more likely we get sued as well, which ends up costing us more because then a judge takes over and tells us to build everything at once. I mean, that's how the Boston Harbor got cleaned up, was the judge basically told the city and the MWRA to spend billions of dollars. We don't want that to happen here. We want to be proactive and get the plan done most cost effectively. As I said, we've phased it in. The first section is we designed to be the most cost effective because it involves dense year-round housing as opposed to seasonal housing. So we get the best bang for the buck. The most gallons that are going into the river and the bay get treated, per unit. So, I don't know what to say. For anybody that's been around the town for very long, they know how the waters have degraded. They know what we had and what we've lost. And the point, at least locally, aside from any legal requirements, is that our economy depends on the quality of our environment and our water. Because if you notice, most of the funding for this particular phase of the project is coming from visitors to Mashpee. The majority is it's less than half is being paid by the town taxpayers. So we got to keep them coming. And again, if the waters get worse and worse, that money disappears too. So a lot of reasons to do it now and not delay, because like I said, I won't say it specifically, but we've delayed long enough and the cost has gone up and up every time we delayed.
I'm going to let the town manager jump in here. He had his hand raised to answer.
Thank you, Patrick. I just want to put it in simple terms. The CPC formula was 3%, and as we all know, it's now 2%. The WIF is now 2 for obviously a net increase of 1%. That is about the average of $89 per year for the average taxpayer. I want to point out, nothing is going to change if people were to vote no. Generally, when people vote no, it's to save money. There is no savings, there's no cost savings. And in addition, there's damage environmentally if there is a no vote.
Let me add to that. In addition, the town would forfeit the $13 million that was just awarded by the Clean Water Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust. It would forfeit the $1.8 million in loan in grant from the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust. And were it to turn this project down, and the result was the town were sued for non-compliance and were ordered to undertake this project by a judge under the state law requirements around the zero interest loan, we become ineligible for a zero interest loan. So even if the project didn't cost a nickel more, which it will, the cost to the taxpayer would go up by a $17 million interest charge, being disqualified from accessing the 0% loan. So saying no is both actually a financial as well as environmental catastrophe for the town. It will not change the outcome. We will end up doing a wastewater management program. We will end up probably doing it under the orders of a judge. Not only will the cost go up, but the access to low interest and beneficial financing will be cut off. And so we'll be doing what we would otherwise have been doing, but without all the subsidy that we worked so hard to gather.
And if I could just point out one more thing and piggyback onto that point. I make it a practice not to get into specifics relative to ongoing threatened or litigation, but I will say this, and the Conservation Law Foundation is aware that I would be saying this. We have had meaningful, constructive dialogue up to this point. If there were to be a no vote, that would have a extremely detrimental impact on that dialogue that has been ongoing, which I anticipate going in a positive direction if we continue to move ourselves in a positive direction.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Is there anybody else with any questions who's on the call right now? And I'm just paging through the attendees. And if anybody does have a question and they can't chat it or raise their hand, they're welcome to unmute themselves and ask the question directly. Okay. I don't see any other hands. I just want to take this moment to thank the panelists, Mr. Collins, Mr. Fudala, and Mr. Gottlieb for their time. And this is twice now they've done this, and this one will be submitted to Mashpee TV to get up on line and on TV. You can see the list of forums on the screen there. Today's is the one in the middle, the April 13th forum on what the plan is about, that included the engineer and the Mashpee Shellfish Constable, as well as Mr. Gottlieb, is already on the Mashpee TV website and on YouTube, so you can view that there. And then 10 a.m. on Thursday, April 22nd, this goes to some of what all of the panelists were talking about today, which is what's at stake. And we are going to bring in some people from town who have various interests in these waters and in keeping them clean, and talk to them about what is at stake. Hope everybody can join us for that one. It should be a good conversation, and one that we encourage everybody to be a part of. If anybody has any questions, you can contact me at mashpeewaters@gmail.com, and I can get you any information that you need, or get you in touch with the person who can answer the question. And again, I would encourage you to attend the April 22nd forum. Anybody who's on this particular forum right now already has the link to that forum. I will send out a reminder of that as well. And anybody who's listening to this online or hearing it and hasn't registered for these forums is welcome to email mashpeewaters@gmail.com and register for these forums. So any last words from the panelists? Anybody have anything they want to add to today's discussion?
all I'd like to tell people is if you think this is a good idea, come out and vote for it. If you think it's a good idea, but it's in the bag and you don't need to come out and vote for it, you're wrong. We need people to show up. We need a 2/3 vote. It's a high bar. And you can't assume someone else is going to do this work for you. And if you do think it's a good idea, find 5 or 10 of your best friends and bring them along with you to come sit out under the tent and watch something really important happen for the town of Mashpee.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add, Patrick, is whenever the town is in a project of this nature and of this magnitude, we try to make sure that the project itself is absolutely justified. The necessity for this has been well articulated. Secondly, we try to make sure that it is also cost effective. We certainly have attained that objective. So I encourage people to get out to town meeting May 3rd and also to vote May 8th. And I thank the public for their interest and their participation. And I thank my fellow panelists as well as yourself for making this exposure possible to the public. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And if nothing else, town meeting is an opportunity for people who have been inside quite a bit over the last year to get outside and socially distantly visit each other and say hello, at least from a few feet apart, 6 feet apart or so. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a good afternoon and a good weekend.
Thank you.